Introduction to Digital Photography. Full frame versus crop sensor. Learning outcomes. In this video, you will learn about the basic and fundamental differences between the two different sensors. This is a nice continuation from where we left off last time when we looked at sensor types. In its simplest form, the main difference between these two sensor types is the size difference. You can clearly see that the exposed sensor on the 5D Mark IV is much wider and bigger than the sensor on the 650D. The crop sensor will take a middle section of the image you're looking at, while the full frame sensor allows you to see the whole of the image, hence the name. Field of view. Naturally, with a crop sensor, you will get a much tighter field of view than what you will get with a full frame camera. On the other hand, you will get a much wider field of view with a full frame sensor, as you can see from this picture I took of some friends during a holiday. In order to calculate the crop down field of view on a crop sensor body, you simply take the focal length of your lens and multiply it by the crop factor. For Canon users, full frame bodies are 1.6 bigger than their crop bodies, and Nikon users are 1.5 bigger. So, let us take a 50mm lens and multiply it by 1.6, which, when you do the math, gives us 80mm, which means that using a 50mm lens on a crop body gives me the equivalent to using an 80mm lens on a full frame body. Low light conditions. Given the fact that the full frame sensor is bigger, each individual pixel will also be bigger. Whereas the smaller crop sensor needs to cram all of those pixels into a smaller surface area so that each pixel will be smaller, pixels on full frame sensors can generally receive light better, and so they generate much less additional noise at high ISOs, unlike their counterparts, the crop sensor, who perform poor at high ISOs. Generally speaking, crop sensors give you much higher noise at high ISOs. Can I use a crop lens on my full frame camera? This is one question I got asked quite a lot from friends and family who are starting out as photographers, and it's one that relates to the compatibility of crop lenses with full frame bodies. The answer is quite simple: no. However, full frame lenses can work perfectly fine on crop bodies. The reason for this is a concept called image circle. If you remove the lens cap and look at the back of the lens, it will look cylindrical in shape. Likewise, the image that is being projected is also circular in its form, and therefore it's called an image circle. But if your image is a circle, then how does this explain your picture or the scene that you see, which is rectangular, as I'm sure you've all seen? The picture is rectangular because the image sensor, which we have already looked at, is rectangular in shape. It's this section of the image circle that comes into the image sensor that becomes your final image. Considering this, full frame lenses have a bigger image circle than the image circle on crop lenses. This is the key difference between these two lens types, and we have seen this in many examples of cropped versus full frame. As I said earlier, full frame lenses have no problem adjusting to crop sensors, and this is because the image circle is big anyway. But on the other hand, if you were to put a crop lens on a full frame sensor, the image circle would be too small to cover the entire sensor. And as a result, you would get a blackened vignette edge around your image. This is why crop lenses do not work with full frame sensors. Crop lenses have less glass inside and are generally easier to carry around because they are lighter in terms of weight when compared with full frame lenses which have more optical glass inside. Canon actually have their own line of crop and full body lenses. EFS is designed for crop sensors and EF is designed for full frame sensors. the EFS lens will have a white dot to label it, and the EF lens will have a red circle, so it's quite easy to recognize one from the other. For those of you who are Nikon enthusiasts, the crop line are called DX and the full frame lenses are FX. The flange distance. For Canon lenses, there is another big reason why crop lenses will not work on full frame sensors. Let's take a closer side-by-side look at the back of a cropped and full frame lens. You will notice that the back of the EFS, which is the crop lens, protrudes more than the standard EF lens. This is an issue because of a term called the flange distance, and this refers to the distance between the rear of the lens and your camera's sensor. With a crop lens and an EFS, you will get a shorter flange distance due to the longer rear of the lens. This short flange distance on a crop sensor camera is possible because the mirror inside the DSLR is also smaller. On the other hand, as we've noted, the mirror inside a full frame camera is much bigger. If you were to take a photograph, the mirror would flick down and hit the rear of the lens, which would be a real problem and could easily damage not only your lens and the sensor, but also the whole camera, because it's very sensitive in this region. But thankfully, Canon haven't given people the opportunity to try something reckless, and they've ensured that the mounting index is different for both EFS and EF lenses. I have seen some photographers experimenting with the extension tubes that are available on the market, and this allows them to use a specific 60mm macro EFS lens on a full frame body camera, but I wouldn't recommend it unless you know exactly what it is that you want to achieve. So, what have we learned in this lesson? We've learned about the difference between full frame and crop sensor. Remember that if you put a crop lens on a full frame sensor, the image circle is too small to cover the entire sensor. It's much better to use the designated lenses with the designated camera bodies, because the sensors will perform much better and give you a much cleaner image.